Most of us probably went to schools where you arrived, unpacked your books, and proceeded through a schedule of classes, from English to history, math and science, and so forth. School was school, and when the school day ended, we went out to play, or take part in sports, or some other extracurricular activity, or went home to study. But for many students, that also left parents scrambling to arrange dental appointments, or after school activities, or additional educational supports. Community schools began to emerge as a result, offering services that went beyond the purely academic. One such local example is the Molly Stark School in Bennington, which began to offer a much broader array of services under Sue McGuire when she became the principal there in the mid 1990s.
It was a typical elementary school, but it was struggling. It had a very high poverty rate. I had taught there for 15 years. So I knew that we cared about kids and we wanted to do it right. I also knew our test scores were extremely low. We had kids that were struggling that didn't have health care, that were struggling with mental health issues, and families that were struggling. And so the interesting thing is I didn't have any idea what a community school was. What happened was Doug Racine, who was lieutenant governor back then, called me one day and said, I heard you have a community school down there. And I had no idea what he was talking about. So he said, I'd like to come down and see it. You know, Governor Dean's interested in it. So I invited him down, and then I quickly looked up what a community school was. That's true. I had no idea. We were doing the things that made sense to help kids and families. And that's what a community school is. It's the opportunities that we would offer our own children and expect and demand for our own children. But many kids don't have those opportunities. And many kids have to choose, their parents have to choose, do we bring them to a dentist, or do we bring them to a doctor, or do we give them some opportunities to do things that are a little fun? What they have to make decisions because they can't do it all. They don't have the funding to do it all and the know-how sometimes to connect with it. Parents love their kids. It doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to navigate middle-class life, which is what we're asking to make sure every kid has. So I looked up full service schools, community schools, and I found this book by Joy Dreyfus, who was the mother of community schools. She's since passed away, but I connected with her and we ended up writing a book together. And she came up to Molly Stark, and that's where we started. But we had already started many different resources and supports and opportunities for kids. And then I found out this is a community school. So I never said, oh, let's start a community school.
Now the community school idea is at the heart of a new piece of legislation being considered by Vermont lawmakers in the still virtual State House. H-106, as the bill is called, has been passed out of the House of Representatives and has crossed over to the state Senate, where it's under consideration by the Senate Education Committee. The lead sponsor is Representative Kathleen James, who is a member of the House Education Committee and represents the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and Sunderland in the state legislature. She described what's in the bill and how it might be implemented if the bill is voted through.
In 2019, I attended a national education policy conference out in Denver, as part of my work with the legislature. And I signed up for an afternoon workshop on community schools, which I'd never heard of, being new to the education committee and new to the legislature. And it was a really inspirational afternoon. There were stories of community schools accomplishing all these fantastic things, with great statistics on outcomes in cities, Baltimore, Philadelphia, LA, Chicago. And I came home and reached out to the Education Commission of the states and asked if they could send along information on community school models operating and succeeding in rural areas. And one of the examples they sent me as an example of sort of an early shining success or a pioneer on the community schools model was Molly Stark in Bennington. So I went down and visited and started to learn more about how community schools are really gaining traction around the country. I think there are about 5,000 identified community schools around the country right now. And with that basis, I introduced a bill to try to start a pilot program or a demonstration grant so that we could see, learn from how the model can help our schools and communities here. So it's a 3-year program, and it's funded with the so-called ESSER funds from the American Rescue Plan. So that's sort of the urgency or the impetus for trying to move this forward right now, which is that we can tap into one-time federal stimulus funds and not have to have a discussion about, the education funds. So it sets aside $3.34 million in the significant amount of federal funding that's coming to the state to allow 10 eligible districts or supervisory unions to participate in a 3-year demonstration grant program. So in order to be eligible to apply, the district or SU has to have at least one public school that has 40% of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. So that's sort of a proxy for measuring low-income students and families. So you need to meet that threshold in order to apply. It's obviously applies only to public schools. And then there are a couple of other ways that the Agency of Education could consider somebody eligible. And that's if they, according to a federal definition, qualify for comprehensive support or for equity support. So schools that are otherwise identified as struggling.
The pilot program for community schools could be one way for schools that serve communities where there's a high need for many of the additional supports young learners can't always take for granted to meet those unmet needs. But there's a long way to go yet. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.